the UK may be on the precipice of profound change to how its democracy works. It's one of the oldest democracies in the world, but every one of its elections have been held under the first-past-the-post voting system. Critics argue that it forces millions of voters to pick between two parties they don't really like, while millions more get no representation at all by voting for parties which get few, if any, seats. But now, two critical trends have emerged which may soon lead the country to adopt proportional representation, the main alternative to first-past-the-post. This could turn British democracy completely on its head. Up to now, the two main parties have been happy to stick with first-past-the-post. The country came close to changing it in 1997 when the Labour Party won a landslide victory. It had committed in its manifesto to holding a referendum on proportional representation. It even held a commission which recommended a specific proportional voting system, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was thought to be in favour. But senior government ministers didn't like the idea, so nothing was done. Fast forward 2 decades to the present day, and two big trends may now bring the country closer to change than ever before. The first is the emergence of massive grassroots support among Labour members and supporters for proportional representation. At the party's 2021 conference, almost 80% of delegates representing party members voted in favour of the voting system. And the country's two largest trade unions, with close ties to Labour, have voted for it as well. In parallel to this, the British electoral landscape may have changed so much that it may now be in Labour's best interest to support proportional representation. This isn't a foregone conclusion, but there is some reason to think that this might be the case. Despite Labour achieving a consistent lead over the Conservatives of up to 10% in polling, the party has no guarantee of winning a majority in Parliament. Seat projections typically put Labour short of an absolute majority, and it looks like it may be difficult for Labour to escape this sort of outcome. Fundamentally, there just don't seem to be many easy pathways for Labour to achieve a strong majority in today's political geography. Scotland captures the problem most acutely. Labour once held dozens of its seats, but now holds just one seat, behind the Scottish National Party, the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Democrats. Together, these parties effectively outflank Labour on both its left and its right. It's very difficult in that context for Labour to offer anything of value to voters in enough seats to make a difference. Thus, even if Labour wins the next election, it might well find itself in a position where it may come to view proportional representation as being in its own long-term interests and set about implementing it. This could happen in two different scenarios. To start with, it's quite possible that it may fail to achieve even a working majority in Parliament. If that happened, it could form a minority government, but it would likely need a confidence and supply arrangement with another party to protect it against motions of no confidence and maintain the flow of money for public spending. Now, there aren't many parties to work with, given the voting system makes it very hard for parties outside the big two to get many, if any, seats. To casual observers, the Scottish National Party might seem like natural bedfellows for Labour, as both parties are social democratic. But Labour has firmly ruled out working with the SNP because some English voters oppose any cooperation with the party. Therefore, in all likelihood, Labour would have to work with the Liberal Democrats, the only other sizable party with mutually acceptable viewpoints. And the Liberal Democrats have said their price for cooperation would be proportional representation, one of their long-time goals. Labour might accept this for a number of reasons. On a basic level, it would have been out of government for over a decade by then, and would be eager to advance its priorities to help the country. It might therefore view proportional representation as an acceptable cost of doing business. Coupled with this, having failed to gain a strong majority this time, the party may be cautious about its future electoral prospects. That might make it more open to proportional representation out of a sense that the party may fare better in future elections under that voting system than under first past the post. And lastly, there would likely be strong internal pressure from the grassroots movement for proportional representation within the party, pushing Labour to adopt the voting system. Now, of course, Labour might be able to just about squeak out a small majority, removing the need for an arrangement with the Liberal Democrats. But even if this happens, there's reason to think the party may still decide to support proportional representation. You see, because some MPs don't actually vote in Parliament, Labour could govern with a working majority that's slightly smaller than a formal absolute majority. And polling suggests Labour may be within reach of a small absolute majority even if it isn't consistently there yet. But ruling with such small margins can be very precarious. At the best of times, the government could struggle to pass laws to advance its priorities, and in the worst moments, it could be liable to infighting, rebellion, and challenges from opposition parties. To further compound matters, over the course of a parliamentary term, government majorities can be eroded due to deaths, resignations, and sometimes even defections. And interestingly, Labour has been here before, way back in the 1970s. In 1974, it managed to win a wafer-thin absolute majority of just 3 MPs. Despite the narrow margins, it did manage to pass a range of laws. But after a few years, it lost its majority, forcing it to agree a confidence and supply arrangement with the Liberal Party. And 2 years after that, it lost a motion of no confidence. That triggered an election which ejected Labour from government for 18 long years. The Conservatives entered government and radically reshaped British society and the economy in a neoliberal direction that many Labour supporters continue to deplore to this day. Therefore, Labour may find it challenging to govern with a small majority and could end up out of government again. It may face a tough time advancing its priorities on such narrow margins, and might foresee a succession of elections which could at best maintain its precarious position or at worst lose to the Conservatives. And that worst case scenario is compounded by the possibility that the Conservatives may have more pathways to a strong majority than Labour, which might make them more likely to win future elections. While the 2019 election had the unique circumstances of Brexit, the Conservatives demonstrated that they could drive deep into Labour territory to secure a strong majority. Labour, by contrast, hasn't yet demonstrated a similar ability to drive deep into Conservative heartlands, despite a few success stories. Presented with this harsh reality, Labour may come to view proportional representation as being in its best interests. The new voting system might empower it to form stable majority governments with like-minded and acceptable parties. At the same time, it could make it more difficult for the Conservatives to ever again gain an unchecked foothold in government, as they would likely have to work with other parties as well. Now, of course, no matter the sophistication of statistical models, nobody can predict the future. Labour may yet win a strong majority and firmly put to bed any talk of proportional representation, much as the party did after its 1997 landslide win. While seat projections have put Labour short of an absolute majority, the margin has been within single digits at times, suggesting that a strong majority isn't entirely out of reach if the party can pull off a really good performance on election day. Equally, it's conceivable that the matter might be put to a referendum which could fail to win public support. Back in 2011, the UK held a referendum on ranked choice voting or alternative vote. While it wasn't proportional representation, it did have advantages over first past the post, but voters still rejected it. The same fate could befall a referendum on proportional representation. But it's still notable that this may be the first time in British history that there's two powerful motors for electoral reform ploughing headfirst into one another. Rarely, if ever, has there been a strong grassroots movement for proportional representation within one of the two main parties, while in parallel that same party is faced with the existential dilemma of having an electoral disadvantage, which means that it may fall short of a strong majority in Parliament for the foreseeable future. It's at such pivotal and unique moments in history that real change can happen. When voters make their choice at the next election, they may not only set in motion the politics of the next few years, but perhaps for generations to come. We might well bear witness to a transformative shake-up of British democracy.